Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Rise and Mastery, and I'm excited to have Michelle Denogean, who's the author of the book GrowUp, Take a Startup to the Next Level, which offers a comprehensive guide to navigating the challenges of starting a startup. Michelle is the CMO of Mindtrip, a travel company, and she's earned her MBA from Pepperdine University. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, you have a lot of experience, and quite interestingly, you've been into tech startups for a long time. You've been into a lot of different verticals, and interestingly, you're in this AI travel startup. But how did you get your start in startups, and what got you interested in this crazy world of marketing?
Yeah, great question. So this will probably date me when I
Mhm.
tell you this. But my very first role in startups was almost exactly at the end of college, like right after I got out of college. I
Mm,
was living in San Diego at the time because I went to UC San Diego,
mm.
and I was looking for jobs to move back to Los Angeles, California. And my mom cut out from the newspaper, like a physical newspaper, if people read that still,
Yeah.
an ad that said, write the web. And my mom handed it to me and she said, it's the internet. It's the next big thing. And so it was a tiny, at the time, it was a tiny, tiny little startup. And the whole company was just a lead form for mortgage brokers to collect
Mm.
leads from people online.
Wow.
And that was, I mean, from the very beginning, after I got out of college, I worked very short time for a publishing company, printed publishing at the time. And then boom, right into very, very early stage startup, like one of my very first jobs, after college. And I've been in and out of it ever since. I've just loved that energy. I actually made a choice around that same time to go back to business school. It was a time when everybody was, finding companies in their garage. They were 18 years old, and venture capital firms were pouring money into them. And I would go to these startup boot camp conferences and I'd be like, how does this person have, you know, a $10 million check in their pocket? They look like they're five. And so I decided to, at that point, because I am the daughter of a certified public accountant, that business is business. And these people probably don't know how to run one because they're so young, and somebody's going to have to be there to help them. And I immediately stopped what I was doing and went back to business school, something I never thought I would do, but it was just a choice and a point in time. And I think that really set me up for that future that you were talking about in working with startups all these years.
Interesting. And um, I mean, it's so interesting that San Francisco and LA has been like the hotbed of tech startups, and we'll talk about the book, but very interestingly, before the call, we talked about your current company, Mindtrip, and how AI is changing travel. But I wanted to ask about, how is AI really changing travel, and will AI, kill marketing jobs? Because we all thought AI will kill the blue collar jobs and, like the jobs of a mechanic or a driver. But it's the creative jobs which I feel that, will be in danger next couple of years. But what are your thoughts about marketing in AI and in travel?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot of new technology that comes, and everybody thinks it's going to just fundamentally change everything immediately. Like, stop the
Right.
press immediately. We're still not all driving electric cars. So I just want
Yeah.
to make sure people are remembering that. I'm sure there will come a time. But, I do think that the technology is there to enhance the experience. I don't think this is a replacement tool where all of a sudden people are going to be out of jobs. I actually use it a lot as a marketer, in addition to working for an AI powered travel platform for efficiency purposes. So it actually helps me be more creative versus replacing the creativity, because you still need to have a strategy. You still need somebody that's there kind of pointing the arrows, and then you can use it to enhance and make things faster and quicker, and come up with different ideas. But it's my belief anyways that it's not going to replace the creativity. It's there to enhance it. So that's on the marketing side. You were asking about travel.
Yeah.
And travel is such an interesting ecosystem because if you really look at the industry, it hasn't drastically changed in a long period of time. It's actually a very fragmented experience as a consumer.
True.
So, I'm sure everybody can relate to this. You go, you find inspiration somewhere, you go to a search engine, you search up a bunch of things, you might go to your social media. Actually, 70% of people, that's where they start in inspiration. And then they all end up somehow in a Google spreadsheet,
Yeah.
an Excel file, right? It might be a notes app or a text message, but we all have to deal with this middle, we almost call it like an hourglass, right? It's like all this inspiration up here, and then you have to book it across dozens of websites, but in the middle, the consumer is left to their own devices to make sense of it. And I
Mm.
think that's really, at least in my world, which is the consumer travel journey, where artificial intelligence has the most opportunity, is to help people go from this vast amount of inspiration into trip planning and organizing and getting that all together in one place. But it is such a fragmented industry. There's so many different opportunities and so many different ways you can use that type of technology. That is how Mindtrip is using it, is to really help people streamline their experience and go from inspiration to booking and on trip, and just have as much delight in that experience as they do as the trip itself.
Mm. So super interesting because I've been part of a travel like a hotel marketplace and being part of a prop tech marketplace as well. It's very fragmented, very interesting market as well. But interestingly, you were such a busy executive because you were like a C-suite executive. You CMO of a high growth startup. But what made you write GrowUp, and how does it differ from other startup advice books?
Yeah. So I wrote the book because I started to hear from so many people in my network, people that I work with, people that I know. I've heard this term over and over again, or this phrase that is, you are so much more than a marketer. And it
Mm.
took me a long time to really understand, what do they mean? Is this a good thing? Like, what do you mean by this? And as I started to really internalize it, I realized it's because of two things. One, I've been in startups now for over 20 years, and I've helped many pretty significant sized companies grow to the potential that they had. And so I've seen that growth pattern. But more importantly, as a chief marketing officer, I sit alongside the founder in the executive suite. And I've observed the things that make the founder great, and how they interact with the rest of the team, what their superpowers are, what makes them amazing, sets the table for everything that happens at the company. And so after that, I think I just have had a unique perspective on what does it take to really grow from a startup to a fully scaled company. And the book for me was a way to not only help, which I have been doing in operating roles, the company that I'm at. I advise companies on the side, so companies that I'm advising, but also help as many people as I can, because I've accumulated all of this knowledge of what does it really take to be successful. And so this is my way of giving back to founders and really leaders anywhere. The book, while it's focused on founders and startups, the principles can be applied to anybody in a leadership position at any stage company. But you also asked, what is it? Makes it different?
Yeah.
And I've heard from a lot of readers that there just isn't anything like it out on the market. And I think the reason for that is it's way more about the psychology of the founder and the leadership team than it is a traditional business book that's going to here are the 5 steps to building your company or whatever. It is a journey of self-awareness more than it is a business book. It's about reflection and really looking internally at who you are as a leader and what makes you great and the type of team you need around you to be successful. So that's what it makes it a little different. It's a little bit of a self-help business book. I don't know if that's a new category, but that's what it is.
Interesting. And you've been an operator for quite a long time. What does um, you know what especially when it comes to very early stage startups, how does an operator, you talked about, you come in very early, help the founders, but what does an operator at an early stage to help the founder grow the business?
What does it mean to help the
Yeah.
founder grow the business? It really depends on the stage of the business and what the business needs,
Right.
but it gets into a little bit of my grow um, method, my grow philosophy, right? And that really is that there are four core competencies you need in order to grow your company. You have to be able to gain conviction, which is
Hmm.
really about, do you have product market fit? Do you have a product that people want to buy? It's about ramping up your company, and that's everything from putting process in place to analytics to making sure you can raise money, right? All those
Yeah.
things, hiring, and then owning your reputation is the third one. So that's all about, how do you make sure that you have a brand that everybody knows and trusts, and that you are out there consistently with that message? And then winning customers, which is
Yeah.
obvious, I think, in what it is, but it really is about, how do you make sure that you can accumulate enough customers in order to showcase that product market fit? And so for a lot of founders in those early stages, they're needing to do all of those things. And it
Hmm.
really depends on who you are as a founder, and what, your gift is, what your superpower is in that equation, that will dictate what it is you actually need to do next. So as an example, if you are really great at solving problems and you're that solution, mad scientist, like, you get it, you understand the customer, you get it, you probably don't need a lot of other people like that. But what you do need is somebody that is going to run numbers and analyze what's happening and helping you raise money, right? So it is all about balance, and I know we'll probably get into that more as we go, but it really, really is about, how do I make sure I'm aware of myself? And then how do I surround myself with the right people that have those core competencies? And that way we can go from where we are today to the potential that we have.
Hmm. Interesting. You mentioned about founders who are very young, and you also work with founders who have had a bit of an experience as well. But, you know, how can founders, you talked about product market fit, there's something also called product founder market fit. How can founders then identify their startup superpower, and, how is it crucial for the initial success?
Yeah, first of all, I love founder product market fit. I don't know, I haven't heard that before. So
Well,
that's amazing. I love it.
yeah.
The biggest thing is you have to do some self-reflection.
Mm.
I actually developed a quiz that you can find in the book. You can also find it on my website, michelledenogean.com. It's based on the Myers-Briggs, personality trait.
Mm.
So it's not new, revolutionary, but what I've done is I've really catered it to people's work styles and how they show up as leaders. And
Mm.
so you can take that quiz and understand who you are and what makes you great. Because I think the one thing that gets lost, especially, it's not for the faint of heart to run a
Yeah,
startup, right?
true.
And it gets lost sometimes when you're up against the wall and feeling these challenges that maybe you're not enough. And I think the one thing I would say to any founder that is listening to this is, you are perfect. Like, you are
Mm.
exactly who you need to be, and you need to embrace what makes you amazing. It's not about changing you. It's about making sure you have the right support system around you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it really is, first and foremost, embrace who you are. Don't
Yeah.
step away from that, but you need to understand what your individual superpower is, so that you understand the ones that you maybe don't have around the table that you need in order to complement you. It's kind of like a house, right?
Yeah.
There's four different superpowers that you need to have that are tied to those core competencies I was talking about. And if you don't have all four, the house falls down, right? They're pillars. And
Yeah.
so it's just about balance.
Hmm. Interesting, because a lot of young founders um, have the capacity to take that risk, and I somehow feel that the younger you are, you should be able to take those risks. But and a lot of times they don't have that sort of work experience to to understand, what they're really good at. But if listeners who just started trying to build their first startup, or they're already build their startup, but they're looking at strategy and how to grow, how can they build those core competencies, and how can they look at developing those core competencies so that they're able to be successful?
Yeah. I think the first thing, it depends on how early, right?
Yeah.
But I would look to find some mentors or advisors if you aren't ready to, bring more people into your team that are shining examples of that core competency. They have the superpower to be successful. And we can talk about the superpowers a little bit because I think that's a critical piece.
Yeah.
There's the innovator, right? Who's the problem solver, mad scientist. There's the builder who's really about process and ramping up the company.
Mm.
Um, there's the connector who
Yeah.
is going to be, all about building your reputation. The thought leader, they know everybody in an industry. And then there's the persuader who is excellent about winning customers, right? They're
Yeah.
they're people, relationship oriented, but it's a means to an end. And if you've got a deal to close, they're the ones for you. So I think it really is, if you're a young founder and you're trying to figure out your way, find some mentors that hold those other superpowers that have been there and done that. And the thing to recognize is roles and superpowers are not one-to-one. It may sound like it. Like you might say, well, of course the persuader is the salesperson.
Right.
But that's not always the case, right? You need to understand what their core competencies are. Sometimes the marketer is actually the persuader, right? The head of
Mm.
marketing is the person that's really great at that. So find those people in your ecosystem somehow. And don't be afraid to reach out to people that you don't know if you don't have that network already, because people want to help other people, especially founders. And
Yeah.
so get some of those mentors or advisors in your environment and lean into them so that they can help you see what you need to do in order to grow until you can actually hire the right people to balance all of those things out.
Hmm. Interesting. And again, I want to talk about growth, because it's, especially in 2024, such a difficult market. Um, would you recommend to look at owning one growth channel, or um, to look at different growth channels and put your money across? What strategies would you recommend for ramping up a company's growth?
It really, really depends on your customers. I always
Mm.
come back to that. And every company, I mean, that's a really broad question because you could be talking about B2B, you could be talking to, consumer facing, and every industry is different.
Sure.
Right now I am advising a company where it's such a relationship business that some of those traditional growth channels that we would think, oh, digital works. No, they're in events, they're meeting face to face, like it's a relationship business. So I think it comes back to, and this is where having an innovator on the team is super helpful because they're great at this, really deeply understanding your customer, understand where they spend time, understand what is important to them. And growth comes in lots of different ways, right? Growth comes in traction and in gaining customers, but it could also be that you uncover a whole new product or solution, for that existing customer set. It could be a new customer set, but the existing product, there's so many different directions to growth that
Right.
I think you have to be in tune with your customer and understand what their needs are first and foremost.
Mm. Interesting. And you talked about owning a reputation. I've seen a lot of founders who are trying to raise money. They're putting AI somewhere in the pitch deck, and they're going on podcasts, and they're trying to put a few pieces on LinkedIn. But why is owning a reputation so important for startups, and how can founders manage it more effectively?
Yeah. well, first of all, I'm a connector, so I could talk about this topic for days.
Yeah.
I think the big thing when it comes to owning your reputation is first and foremost understanding the reputation you want. So I think a lot of times early stage founders, and they're told this a lot of times, to be honest with you, they've been told this sometimes by their investors.
Yeah.
You have an amazing product. Just go get customers. Just run, go get customers. And they think that doing anything related to figuring out who you want to be known as and getting to know your ecosystem feels a little bit like a waste of time to a lot of people. They're just run, just do it. But I think it's a crucial step to really understand who you want to be known as. Build your brand. It's not about advertising or spending money. It's first and foremost about just understanding how you want to position yourself. And then all of that thought leadership and everything comes after that, because it all is tied to who you want to be known as a company. And the thing about thought leadership is, and I tell people this all the time, whatever industry you're in, the answer when somebody reaches out to you from that industry is yes. And what I mean by that is take the call, take the email. You never know where a conversation will lead, but make sure you're really clear on your value proposition and how you want the industry to see you and your company before you start any of that.
Interesting. And what tactics would you think of winning customers? You talked about a founder who may be really good in product, but when it comes to winning customers, can he uh, sh- give along that piece of selling to the customers to someone else in his team? Or what advice would you give to them on how to win customers and increase sales?
Yeah. So it again, it depends on if it's B2B or B2C, because
Yeah.
those tactics and the strategies around winning customers are very different. You
Yeah.
take it for me, I've been in both. I'm in B2C right now. I've been in B2B for years.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about B2B, which usually is where that, conversation comes up, it really, I think in the very early stages, when you're just starting to get your company known, it's important for the founder to be involved. They don't have to be the only one, though. If you have somebody on the team who is great, they've got charm, they've got charisma, they're analytical, they bring up, the right level of like proof points and overcome objections, like by all means, make sure they're leading your effort, because they're going to be the ones that win the most customers. But I would be remiss to say, even if you're just along for a ride with that type of person in the early days, for a lot of reasons, it makes sense for somebody on the founding team to be involved, just because those first few customers, they're betting on you in a lot of ways. You're not proven. And so, in those early days, it's much about the founder and confidence in that team than it is of the product itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. And what I've seen is a lot of founders, when they're trying to solve a problem, um, they sometimes get into those blind spots. What advice would you give to founders on how do you identify and address those leadership blind spots? This could be for an younger and older experienced entrepreneur.
Yeah. First, I want to differentiate that blind spots are different than weaknesses. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us are very clear on our weaknesses. We know where we might not be as proficient as
Mm.
other parts of what we do as leaders. Blind spots are the thing you can't see.
Yeah.
It's the one thing, like I think the best way to describe how to at least start to think about it, it's the one thing that you don't prioritize. It actually is the thing that falls to the bottom of your list, no matter how long it sits on your list, usually is a good indicator that that is a blind spot area. It could be that everybody's telling you need to hire a specific role and you're just like, I don't need that right now. Right.
Mm.
So the blind spot is the thing that you can't see. But the thing about blind spots is everybody else can see them. And
Mm.
so it's important that we do that self-reflection and understand what our blind spot is and become aware so we can appreciate. Because a lot of times, one of two things happens when you have a blind spot. Either you aren't empowering somebody on your team that is really great at that one thing that's in your blind spot. So you're sabotaging them in some capacity, not intentionally, but you are. Or you just even haven't hired that person because you're like, I don't need that right now. In the book, I talk about the blind spots that are connected to specific superpowers. So I've tied those together.
Mm.
As an example, I think a lot of founders will, in some shape or form, resonate with the innovator. And the innovator that is the big ideas person that understands the customer deeply and, finds a solution that's unique to their problems. The innovator's blind spot is process. And most innovators that I have worked with, and actually I'd say a good chunk of the founders I've worked with do fall into that innovator camp in some capacity. They will avoid it at all costs. They just want to run really fast. These are the risk takers. They're just like, let's go. I've got a big idea and a team that's going to solve it, and we're good. And red tape and process is going to slow us down. But here's what has happened, or I've seen happen. At some point, your product gets to a place where you have customers that are sending in issues with your product, right?
Mm.
Bugs, small tweaks that need to be made to make it better. And somebody at some point in your company will stand up and say, hey, we need to put process in place to prioritize these so we make sure that we can do them all. And at that point in time, when that happens, traditionally, the innovator will see things that they care about most. The big rocks will slow down a little bit. And they get really frustrated because they think that red tape is stopping them from all the great innovations they have. They're not wrong necessarily that it is slowing things down. But what ends up happening in the end is they'll carve off a team like, we're gonna do it over here. Now you have less people focused on these customer issues. And eventually your customers get upset. And if you have a competitor that will go in and not have those issues, you start to have a retention issue and a leaky bucket. And so that's where a blind spot, just as an example with an innovator, can really hang you up, is when you avoid it at all costs. You try to circumvent it, you sabotage it, but in the end, you actually need it in some capacity to grow your business.
Mm. Interesting. And, since you've been into a lot of startups, what are some of the key indicators that suggest that it's time for a startup to pivot? And, how should a founder look at addressing and approaching this process?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say about pivots is pivots are not bad.
Mm.
I think there's a misconception of pivots.
Yeah.
Pivots can be the biggest opportunity that you have for your company. And we don't think about it often, but some of the companies we know really, really well, and I'll just throw out a couple, like YouTube and Slack as examples. Those are great examples. Were not the companies that they are today at all, actually. YouTube started as a dating site. I don't know if everybody knows this. It was a video dating site, and
Yeah.
it felt creepy to women and nobody wanted to upload their videos. But they understood after experimenting with it that actually, wait, maybe this is not quite the fit, but people really do like this video thing. And look at them now. Slack was a completely different company. Slack was built as a homegrown product they built for efficiency purposes. And when the other, company wasn't able to gain traction, they spun it out because they knew that this product was working so well for them, and they started getting other people interested. So I think the first thing to think about when it comes to pivots is they're not bad. They actually can be the biggest opportunity. And typically the indicators are pretty common. It's just like lack of traction, right? It's the biggest indicator. And so you just need to be aware at all times of what's happening with your business. And when you see that things may be harder than they need to be, then maybe take a step back. Maybe you have the right audience, you have a great customer set, just maybe the product isn't solving a big enough problem. Or maybe you have an amazing product and there's just an adjacent audience that would enjoy it more. And so I think pivoting needs to be taken off the bad word list because I think it can be really beneficial. I mean, my last company, Roadster, what we pivoted, we started out as a direct to consumer, automotive car shopping site for new cars. And over time, distribution got difficult. And we saw all of these car dealers around the country were really interested in what we were doing. They hated that we were trying to intermediate them, but they loved the technology. And so we pivoted, and the company became the darling of the automotive industry for online car buying. So you never know, but you have to stay open. And I think what's really interesting is most founders in the very, very beginning of building their company are serious risk takers, right? They gave up everything. They typically stop taking a salary. They pour everything into this company that they built. Somewhere along the way, though, they can get stuck. They get attached to their original vision, and so much so that they're unwilling to see what's right in front of them. And so I would say just stay open to change. It could be your biggest opportunity.
Interesting. And, in 2023 or 24, a lot of founders are worried about the startups. And, I think VC's got a bad name in the last couple of years now. But how can founders manage and overcome that fear of failure, especially when they feel that, they raised a lot of money from 21, 22, but in the last couple of years, they're struggling to pay salaries. How do you advise founders to overcome that fear of failure?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what I was talking about a minute ago, which
Yeah.
is when you're looking out, and I know it is hard. Like, I know that there's been a lot of companies that have been struggling to raise more money, and there's been adjustments that have had to happen from an operations standpoint. I think that's really where staying open to the opportunities in front of you and not being afraid to make changes comes into play, because every great company had change at some point in time. And so you just have to recognize that and see the writing on the wall, and make sure you're fostering a culture that embraces that too, so that it isn't just all on you as the founder. Your whole leadership team should own that together. And so you need that mind share, that brain power around you to figure out, how do we maneuver from here? And if it's not working and you feel like things aren't going the direction they need to be, what do we need to change, evolve, pivot? There's lots of different ways to do this in order to be successful. For some companies, they might have grown too fast. I know in my book, I talk a little bit about this, that there's sort of like a Goldilocks syndrome with raising money. And you could either raise too much or too little, and go alongside that as you can hire too fast or too slow. And I've seen a lot of companies hire, like, if they do raise a good amount of money, they hire too fast. And then they're stuck kind of backtracking that, right? They get those rose-colored glasses that their growth pattern is going to go up and up and up. And so they hire into that future instead of being a little bit more protective and cautious along the way. And I always feel like it's okay. There's a balance there. You don't have to run at it after you raise the money. You just have to be smart about it and make sure, wait for there to be a little bit of pain and then bring those people on. Those are some things that I think, when we're dealing with times like this, are important for founders to keep in mind.
Interesting. And any advice for founders who are transitioning from startup phase, they've gone from 0 to 1, but they're looking at 1 to 100? What's the advice for them?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, make sure that you celebrate what made you great at starting your company every day. And I think it's really hard to do that, because I've seen founders try to do a lot, especially early stage. They do a lot themselves. They try to, and they get away from the thing that makes them amazing. And they need to understand that what makes you great at starting is not going to be what makes your company great at growing. and your team sees it. They're in awe of you. They think the world of you. They can see your superpower like there's nothing to it. But do the work to understand your blind spot, because they see that too. And you can't adjust for this growth phase and to take it to the next level without really understanding your blind spot, so that you make sure that you embrace every single type of person that you need on your team.
Interesting. And Michelle, I want to talk about the process for the book. We had a brief chat about it, but what was the entire writing process? Because it's amazing that you advising and building a startup, but writing a book. What was the entire process for you? And also when it comes to writing, it's also about publishing and selling the book. What was the process for you?
Yeah. The process was long.
Mhm.
I told you before we got on. It's been almost 3 years in the making. And part of that was because I started writing the book on my own before I found my publisher. And so I spent a good 6 months writing the book that apparently was for me. That's what I was told. I was told, this is perfect for you. Now let's get to work. We're going to write this book. So that would be the one thing that I would change in the process. But for me, it was all about time boxing. People always ask, like, how do you, because I also have teenagers. We didn't talk about that, but I have teenagers in my house. I work full time. I advise companies. And for me, it's always about making sure you have dedicated time. And so the book was really written on the weekends, on time off. It wasn't something that I folded into my everyday workday in a way that was chaotic. I had to make space for it. In fact, the book is dedicated to my husband and kids because they ate breakfast late every weekend for 3 years while I was writing the book. And so, it's a journey for sure. It's a journey to write a book. It is hard work. It's very different for those people who aspire to write one someday. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to people about it, especially as a writer in life. Like, I've always written for the companies that I have worked with as a thought leader. I've spoken at conferences. I've done a lot of writing in my lifetime, and writing a book and that process was way different. It's so different than writing just like a short form piece. And so you have to sort of prepare emotionally for that process, but it's worth it in the end. And like I said to you in the beginning, this was a bucket list item for me. I've been wanting to be an author since I was 14 years old, my daughter's age. So I'm very, very happy that I was able to accomplish this, and a lot more to come.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's always great to speak to authors who, with the full-time job, are able to write, because it's so difficult to manage writing a book. I've spoken to a lot of authors who do say it takes 3 to 4 years, so it's like a lifetime's work. But many congrats on launching the book. And I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
Yeah, it's an oldie but goodie for me. It's also written by, well, actually, I should say, first of all, my book. Let's be clear. No, I'm kidding. I should have been my immediate answer. But in truth, it's a oldie but goodie for me. A mentor of mine, Jim Stengel, who was the former global marketing officer at Procter and Gamble, wrote a book called Grow. Not connected. I know my book is called GrowUp, not connected. But it was about purpose and building out a company's purpose and tying purpose to growth, right? So he was able, through research, to tie that together and show that when you are a purpose-led company, you'll be more successful than other companies. And so that book just had a really big impact on me at the right time, and he had a big impact on me. So I always say that that's my favorite business book.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. And, if you could go back in time when you started writing the book, I know you talked about it, but what is one thing you would have focused on or done things differently?
Like I said before, I would have found my publisher before writing half the book.
Mhm.
That is for sure. I think the other thing, truth be told, when I first started this journey, I was in this process of really unpacking and understanding, like I said in the beginning, this phrase that I kept hearing about, you're more than a marketing person. And
Mm,
so my eyes at the very beginning were on this passion I had, because I'm a marketer, to help startups understand the power of brand. And, my publisher asked me, she said, do startups want that? I'm like, no, that's why I want to write the book. Um, it was a journey for me, honestly, to evolve both my thinking and my, like, really tapping into my learning and what I've done over the last 20 years alongside these amazing founders, to get to a place where this is not a marketing book. This is a leadership, grow a company book. And that to me was a big transition. I wouldn't do it differently by any means, because it was alongside my journey as a, operator. But it's just an interesting part of that journey, that's partly why it took the amount of time that it did, was evolving my own thinking and broadening my own thinking as to the level of impact that I can have in the startup world.
mm. Interesting. And do you have any favorite online tool, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
I think my favorite tool still to this day is Google Docs. I
Yeah.
know that sounds probably old school. It'd be like, isn't it ChatGPT or something? I am such a multitasker, crazy multitasker, like nobody's business. And so when Google Docs came on, it was like my everything, because now I could access it from my phone, my iPad, everywhere. And every time I wanted to edit anything, it was available at my fingertips. So I think to this day, I mean, I use all the other tools, Slack, Zoom, like all the typical ones, but that's probably, from an efficiency standpoint, for me, being the person that sits at the doctor's office writing thought pieces, they're probably my favorite tool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. I mean, OpenAI is giving stiff competition to Google, but Google has made some brilliant products, and which we still use. So, no, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. And Michelle, what's the best way people can reach out to you and know more about your book?
Yeah, you can reach me on my website, which is michelledenogean.com. And then, my on LinkedIn, Michelle Denogean too. You guys can DM me. And I'm also Michelle at michelledenogean.com. Like, there's lots of ways. But I'm really open. So anybody that wants to have a conversation after this, please reach out.
Sure, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes, and you can buy the book from Amazon, or is it?
You could buy from Amazon. Is there anybody else at this point? No. Barnes and Noble, and anywhere that you can buy books.
Got it. Yeah, got it. We'll put that in show notes. Michelle, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.